March 3rd, 2017. Some may remember it as Employee Appreciation Day, but I will remember it as the day that the history of gaming changed forever, for it was on that very day that one of my all-time favorite games released. I present to you... Not that one. That's better. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. There are so many moving parts that make this game the masterpiece it is, and today I'm going to be giving you the grand tour, a look behind the scenes, to see what makes Breath of the Wild so amazing. Now, before we get into the real meat of this game, I want to touch on the style. First off, the game is nothing special in the graphics department. It'll run your standard 1080p, and that's all it really needs. One of the things I personally love about Breath of the Wild is its cel-shaded look. It's not super cartoonish, and it's not the height of realistic graphics either. It makes everything pop, and I'm just a big fan of how the world of Hyrule looks in this game. Another thing to point out is the user interface. It's super accessible and helpful. For example, switching between weapons, bows, and shields is all at the press of a button. No pausing and interrupting the game, the option is just readily available. The menus are super easy to navigate, which is helpful because you'll be using them a whole lot to access all your clothes and food especially. Now that we've covered the bread and butter, let's move on to the main course. Alright, this is the big one, the entree, the steak and fries of Breath of the Wild. I'm talking about the gameplay, of course. This is where the game truly shines. It's the main focus of the whole Breath of the Wild experience. But enough rambling, let's dive in. Breath of the Wild is known for breaking many conventions of the Zelda franchise, bringing an open-world style to the table, doing away with traditional dungeons, a new breakable weapon system. Breath of the Wild revolutionized the Zelda formula. There is a huge emphasis on exploration in this game. From the moment you paraglide off of the Great Plateau, you're basically free to do whatever you want, no constraints at all. You don't even have to do any of the story if you don't want to. You could spend countless hours just exploring Hyrule, seeing as there's something to find in every corner of the world. As you explore Hyrule, you're sure to come across lots of weapons lying around, lots of breakable weapons. The combat system in Breath of the Wild is a refreshing change from just about every other game in the franchise. See, instead of having like 10 weapons that you keep for the duration of the game, Breath of the Wild makes all of the weapons breakable, ensuring that you have a constantly changing loadout. Speaking of, the weapon variety in this game is simply incredible. You've got swords, great swords, axes, spears, clubs, boomerangs, even a chainsaw if you know where to look. The point is, this is the best combat has ever been in a Zelda game. But there's more. When you start your journey, Link receives a strange object, the Sheikah Slate. This thing will help you across your adventure with its 4 main runes. Magnesis, the ability to manipulate metal objects. Cryonis, the ability to raise ice blocks out of water. Bomb, the ability to, well, make a bomb. And my favorite rune, Stasis, which has the ability to stop objects in time. These runes will be a big help in the Divine Beasts, the game's main dungeons. And on the topic of dungeons, Breath of the Wild brings more changes. This time around, the dungeons have a bigger focus on exploration rather than puzzle solving. You'll spend your time finding and activating terminals before fighting a boss at the end so you can reclaim the Divine Beast. Did I mention the beast part? Because these dungeons are actually gigantic moving creatures, and getting inside the dungeons is a whole different ballgame. You'll have to subdue it first before you can make your way inside, which was a really cool touch. However, while these Divine Beasts are certainly great and fit well with the Breath of the Wild gameplay formula, I still prefer more traditional Zelda dungeons, with all of their puzzles and mini-bosses and all that. This is something I hope Breath of the Wild can improve upon in its sequel. Anyway, by now I'm sure you can see how important gameplay is to Breath of the Wild. What an exceptional main course that was. Okay, now that we've discussed the meat of Breath of the Wild, we can move on to the side dishes. You know, like your salad and baked potatoes. Anyway, the next part of this game I'd like to highlight is the music. There is always a good track for wherever you are in Hyrule. Are you out in the great wide central Hyrule? The music couldn't be more relaxed. How about Korok Forest, the perfect song for a mystical tree's hiding spot? And don't forget Rito Village. The music really matches the landscape around you. And it's not just the calm music that sounds amazing. The more upbeat tracks do a great job of setting the mood for intense action sequences. Take, for example, when you're pursuing the divine beast Va Naboris. Or when you get spotted by a camp of wild monsters. And especially when you're doing battle with the terrifying guardians. The point is, Breath of the Wild's soundtrack knows how to immerse you in the world of Hyrule. Now, the last thing I'd like to discuss is Breath of the Wild's story. I feel like this is the one spot where the game sort of fell short for me, to be honest. It didn't feel as full to me as other Zelda games, like Skyward Sword or Twilight Princess. In Breath of the Wild, it's more like, hey Link, you just had a 100-year nap. Anyway, the princess is trapped in Hyrule Castle. Go, save her or something, I guess. Oh, and the only story content we're gonna give you is 10 flashback sequences that just explain what you and your buddies were up to before you all died. And I get that the story shouldn't be super rich with detail, because Breath of the Wild is supposed to be more exploration-oriented, and the story component is more of a background thing, but I sorta wanted a little more. Anyway, that's my one gripe with the game. Now, what do I think of it overall? Alright, what have we discussed today? Let's see. Style, 10 out of 10. Gameplay, 11 out of 10. Music, 12 out of 10. Story? Anyway, Breath of the Wild is an excellent deviation from the standard Zelda formula, and I would love to see the series follow in this game's footsteps. With all this in mind, I give The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild a 1 out of 10, because the game doesn't let you pet the dogs.